Lots of people love to argue, but few know how to win an argument. Welcome to Sharpening Arrows, where we train teens to think biblically about life and politics. I'm your host, Victor Jakes. Now, I have to say, I survived the weekend. My wife, my beautiful, lovely wife, went to Texas to the Share the Arrows conference. Great name. Hosted by Allie Beth Stuckey, which meant it was just me and all my children. And they all survived. I double counted. They were all here when she came back. And my wife had just a wonderful time. Really enjoyed the conference, really enjoyed being with her sister and my sister. And I was thinking about that, obviously. And then online, there were clips of Allie Beth Stuckey doing a podcast called Jubilee, which often features a person being surrounded by people who have a different opinion than them, and then they kind of go back and forth and debate stuff. Anyway, Allie Beth Stuckey was surrounded by 20 liberal Christians. I have not had time to listen to the whole episode, but I have seen clips, and it was simply a brilliant example of debating. And I thought, what a perfect topic for us to discuss, because we've been talking about issues, we've been diving into issues, but now we're actually going to look at what does it mean to win an argument, and how do you do it? If you want to watch on YouTube, we are on YouTube, youtube.com/@sharpening-arrows. My son is producing this podcast. There's been no little amount of fighting between him and my daughter over who gets to produce this. But once again, if anything goes wrong, it's not my fault. I got someone to point the finger to. And the other fun thing about YouTube is that if my children interrupt me, which is a real possibility, just going to put that out there, you can see it on YouTube. It's right there. All right, so we're going to talk about the best way to win an argument. And I do not mean, when I say this, the arguments that may not occur in your house, but certainly occur in my house, which I would define as little more than petty bickering between siblings. I mean an argument about an idea, about the things that matter, the things that are deepest in life, whether it's politics or religion, how we spend our time, the things that we value. And as always on this podcast, we are going to start with arguments for the side that I personally disagree with, and then we will talk about the other side. All right, so how do you win an argument? Well, what's the best way to win an argument? Number one, you need to tell your opponent why they're wrong. You need to expose your opponent's ignorance. Debate is like a game. You want to outpoint your opponent. Oh, try saying that again. You want to outpoint your opponent. They're obviously wrong because they don't know the truth that you know. And so you need to take every little opportunity. When they say something, you jump right in there and you just point out the problems with it. All right, let's have a pause point right there. Do you think that's a good way to win an argument? Telling your opponent why they're wrong. All right, number two, how to win an argument. Be aggressive. In games, you are supposed to be aggressive. Fortune favors the bold. Some of my younger boys are playing soccer, and my wife does most of the coaching. I do most of the part of the parenting. But one thing that you're trying to teach young kids in soccer, is to be aggressive. Why? Because the ball is not going to stop itself. If you are the defender, you need to go and stop the person with the ball. It's the same thing in debate, right? You have to be aggressive. You have to expose the weaknesses of your opponent. You need to crush them. Now, when I was a teenager, you may or may not believe this, but I really enjoyed arguing. If I wasn't so tired from parenting, I probably would still just enjoy arguing. Some people are like that. Their adrenaline gets pumping. Guess what happens when your adrenaline gets pumping? You get more aggressive. You get on the attack. It's very easy to adopt this mindset. And one way that this comes out, number 3, is that you need to talk more than your opponent. We kind of covered this with tell your opponent why they're wrong, but if you talk more than your opponent, you have more shots on the goal than they do, right? If you're playing soccer, what do you want your team to do? You want your team to shoot the ball at the goal. First of all, that prevents your opponent from having shots on your goal, from attacking your position, and it puts them on the defensive. They have the wrong ideas. They need to hear the right ideas. You would convince them if only they would just listen to you talk. All right, let's have a pause point there. Have you tried any of these techniques? How'd it work out? Now, as you're talking about that, let me tell you about Mama Bear Prayers, a podcast for moms who are knee-deep in dishes and training their teens. Whether you are in the carpool lane or the coffee line, host Charity Rios wants to come alongside you and help you grow deeper in your relationship with Jesus. Now, as every parent knows, raising kids can feel a bit like a ping pong game. You bounce from moments of joy to moments of deep concern. Combine this with the busyness of life, and this back and forth can leave you feeling overwhelmed and even isolated. Now, Charity is the mom of 4 very busy boys, and she knows this firsthand. And it's why she created Mama Bear Prayers, to support moms who are on the journey of raising kids. God works through prayer, so check out Mama Bear Prayers today. All right, I've given you 3 ways to argue that I actually don't think are always the best ways. So let's start with this. Which of the great 8 applies to those arguments? And just so you remember, the great 8 are 8 questions that we have in our mental toolbox, so that when we encounter an issue or a question, we can use these questions to help us think through it. All right, number 1, what happens next? Number 2, has this been tried before? Number 3, is there a principle involved? Number 4, what are the trade-offs? Number 5, what do you mean by that? Number 6, is this an appeal to emotion or logic? Number 7, am I focused on the speaker or the argument? And number 8, what does the Bible say? And remember, just because I don't select the question that you did doesn't mean you're wrong. There's lots of ways to approach this issue. Well, if you tell your opponent why they're wrong, let's ask question number 1. What happens next? You could also ask question number 2, because you've probably tried this approach. What has this been tried before? What happened? Well, I'm going to guess that they did not admit that you were right. As someone who has tried this approach lots of times, I don't think I ever had someone just come out and just say, "Oh, wow, that was, you know what, you were 100% right. I totally missed it." No, what happens? Well, oftentimes they will ignore your best argument. They'll switch topics. They'll get on any rabbit trail that they can. And they may even think the same thing about you. And why is this the case? Well, there's a term called cognitive dissonance. And this is from Very Well Mind, and here's how it describes it. Cognitive dissonance is the mental discomfort that results from holding 2 conflicting beliefs, values, or attitudes. People tend to seek consistency in their attitudes and perceptions, so this conflict causes unpleasant feelings of unease or discomfort. Well, of course they should feel unease and discomfort. I've just proven them wrong. And so there's a simple solution. All they should do is admit that I was right, and then the cognitive dissonance would go away. But that's not what usually happens. There's different ways that people attempt to relieve this tension. They could reject or explain away or avoid new information. This is from Very Well Mind. Sometimes learning new information can lead to feelings of cognitive dissonance. For example, if you engage in a behavior that you later learn is harmful, it can lead to feelings of discomfort. People sometimes deal with this by finding ways to justify their behaviors or finding ways to discredit or ignore new information. Do we see that? It's not just it's not just about logic. When you are talking to someone, when you're debating with someone, if you make a good argument, and here's the ironic part about this information is the better your arguments, the more it can cause someone to hunker down because they're simply looking for ways to discredit your information or ignore the new information that you bring up. And here's the interesting thing: the greater the importance someone attaches to each belief, there can be even greater dissonance. And here's the takeaway from Very Well Mind. Cognitive dissonance plays a role in many value judgments, decisions, and evaluations. Being aware of how conflicting beliefs impact the decision-making process is a great way to improve your ability to make faster and more accurate choices. And that's true. We should always be aware of our own biases and the things that we hold highest. So we've presented the problem, right? Is that the more that I tell someone that they're wrong, the more likely they are to tune me out or to find other justifications for their beliefs. And this leads right into the second argument, is being aggressive, right? Being aggressive, you are just kind of doubling down on this approach. And there's simply more than that. Unlike in sports, okay, if you are competing with someone, if you are playing basketball, if you are playing football, you need to get somewhere faster than your opponent. You need adrenaline. You need the power that comes from emotion. But debate isn't like that. In fact, if you are calm, it portrays power and a complete command of the issue. When you are calm, what you are showing someone else is that you've heard this before and know your response. And if you watch the Allie Beth Stuckey podcast on Jubilee, this is a terrific example of it. There is a very sharp debate on a number of issues, and Allie is calm. She doesn't have to be aggressive. That doesn't mean she's a wallflower. That doesn't mean she backs down from what she believes, but she's not aggressive. She's not, not physically imposing on someone. Intellectually imposing? Absolutely. Not physically imposing. I want to talk to you about a great book, Tactics. I'll even hold it up for the camera. Greg Koukl, Tactics, a game plan for discussing your Christian convictions. Really a terrific book. It kind of hits on this subject. And I want to just quote from something on here that he talks about. And this kind of goes along with the point about why we shouldn't be aggressive in these conversations. When you're talking with someone, here's what he says. With these types of disputes, I have a general rule. If anyone in the discussion gets mad, you lose. When you get mad, you get angry, you look belligerent, you raise your voice, you scowl, you glare. You may even start cutting the other person off before he's had an opportunity to make his point. Not only is this bad manners, but it begins to look like your ideas are not as good as you thought they were. So you resort to interruption and intimidation to get your way. You begin to replace persuasion with power. It's not a good strategy. It's never really convincing, even if you're successful in bullying the other person into silence. And, here's the thing. If you are someone like me who really enjoys debate, sometimes the aggression can just come because you enjoy it, right? Like you're doing this activity and it's fun. And that's where the adrenaline comes from. But we have to know that's actually backfiring on us. And that leads right into the third point of out-talking your opponent. It runs into the same problem. You're causing your opponent to hunker down. All right. So, actually, I'm going to read one more thing from Koukl here, which responds to these things. People who are angry get defensive, and defensive people are not in a very good position to think about whether your ideas are compelling ones. And that really leads into, okay, we've talked about how we shouldn't do it, all the things that come natural to us. being forceful, making our points strongly, being really talkative, those don't work. So how do we convince people? Because ideas matter. Ideas about the truth of Christianity matter. What happens in our politics matter. All ideas are not the same, but how do we convince people? Okay. To do this, you need to ask yourself a couple of questions. First, who am I trying to persuade? Am I trying to persuade an individual or an audience? And then the second question is, will the individual I am trying to persuade feel threatened, embarrassed, or angry if their argument doesn't hold up? All right, so let's just recap that. Who am I trying to persuade, an individual or an audience? And then secondly, will the individual I am trying to persuade feel threatened, embarrassed, or angry if their argument doesn't hold up? All right, so let's kind of break these down because they're different situations and you're going to approach them differently. Let's talk about this. Let's have a pause point. Have you ever been in a debate with an individual? How'd it go? Okay, this is probably the most common occurrence. It could be with a friend, it could be with a teacher, it could even be with a stranger. It might be someone in your family that you are having a disagreement with. Okay, if that's what's happening, you're talking with someone one-on-one. You need to think of this as a conversation, not a debate. Because what we just learned is that the better you are at debate, the more aggressive, the more cutting, the less you're actually going to persuade that person. And so when you're talking with someone who disagrees with you, what I want you to do, what I encourage you to do, is to listen, to ask questions, to try to understand what that person believes and why. Okay, that's really important. You're trying to understand what they believe and why. And two things are likely to happen, one of two outcomes. First of all, they might ask you for your opinion. And this is actually a great opening. If someone asks you, what do you think? Oh, now they're open. And maybe they're just reciprocating the question that you asked. Maybe it's even sort of pro forma. Whatever. They asked you for your opinion. That's the time to give it. And I would encourage you more to give it as a testimony about why you believe what you believe, not as a debate. If it's on a Christian topic and it can fit in, Scripture is powerful. The Bible talks about the Word of God being like a double-edged sword. Definitely a time to talk about what the Bible believes. If you're ever talking with someone and you kind of get a nudge from the Holy Spirit about, this is someone you should maybe share the gospel with, maybe talk with about Christian beliefs. One thing I found is simply to ask someone, what do you believe about God? And then listen. And oftentimes they will ask me back, well, what do you believe? And then that's a time to share. That's a time to share honestly about how I believe that people are sinners, that I am a sinner, because Romans 3:23 says, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, that our sin separates us from God, that only because of Romans 5:8, God demonstrates his own love for us, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Jesus died on the cross to take the penalty of my sin, the sin that I deserve to pay the penalty for. He took it. And now if I confess with my mouth that Jesus is Lord and that God raised him from the dead, I will be saved. And that's where my confidence comes from. And that's where I hope, that's the only source of confidence we have. All right, so they might ask you for your opinion on the topic. Or the other thing they might do, and this is why you need to listen carefully, they might expose some weakness or internal contradiction, not that you can pounce on and destroy them and crush their arguments underneath your feet. Okay, do you hear me? When you've listened carefully and you've encountered a weakness or an internal contradiction, you're not to crush them in vigorous debate. You are to probe them with questions. Okay, Greg Kokel in his book Tactics. Again, terrific book. Encourage you to buy it, to read it. I'm just going to read an example here, and this is kind of a chance conversation. He was on vacation with his family in Wisconsin, and he stopped in a store with his wife to get some photos digitized. He noticed that the woman helping us had a large pentagram, a 5-pointed star often associated with the occult, dangling from her neck. Does that star have religious significance? I asked, pointing to the pendant, or is it just jewelry? Yes, it has religious significance, she answered. The 5 points stand for earth, wind, fire, water, and spirit. Then she added, I'm a pagan. My wife, caught off guard by the woman's candor, couldn't suppress a laugh and then quickly apologized. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be rude. It's just I've never heard anyone actually admit right out that they are a pagan. She only knew the term as a negative one. So you're a Wiccan? I continued. Yes, she nodded. She was a witch. It's an earth religion, the woman explained. Like the Native Americans, we respect all life. If you respect all life, I ventured, then I suppose you're pro-life on the abortion issue. She shook her head. No, actually I'm not. I'm pro-choice. I was surprised. Isn't that an unusual position for someone in Wicca to take? I mean, since you're committed to respecting all life? You're right. It is odd, she admitted. And then she qualified herself. I know I could never do that, she said, referring to abortion. I could never kill a baby. I wouldn't do anything to hurt someone else because it might come back on me. Now, this was a remarkable turn of the conversation for two reasons. Again, this is Greg Kokel writing. First, notice the words she used to describe abortion. By her own admission, abortion was baby killing. The phrase wasn't a rhetorical flourish of mine, it was her own description. I didn't have to persuade her that abortion takes the life of an innocent human being. She already knew it. So, for the rest of the conversation, he didn't talk about abortion, he used the term baby killing. And second, I thought it was surprising her first reason for not hurting a defenseless child was self-interest. Something bad might befall her. Well, maybe you couldn't do anything to hurt a baby, but other people would, I countered calmly. Shouldn't we do something to stop them from killing babies? I think women should have a choice, she responded quickly without thinking. Now, generally, statements like women should have a choice are meaningless as they stand. Like the statement, I have a right to take. The claim requires an object. Choose what? Take what? So, what did he do? Did he attack her? Did he point out that that's just a catchphrase with really no meaning? No, he asked another question. Do you mean women should have the choice to kill their own babies? Well, she thought for a moment, I think all things should be taken into consideration on this question. Okay, tell me, what kind of considerations would make it all right to kill a baby? Incest, she answered. Oh, all right. So he decided to take the conversation one step further. Let me see if I understand your view, I said. Let's just say I had a 2-year-old child standing right next to me who had been conceived as a result of incest. On your view, it seems I should have the liberty to kill her. Is that right? She stopped, considered it, and said, I'd have mixed feelings about that. And then he moved on because he was in line at a store. Now, I want you to notice a couple things. First of all, he simply asked questions. He simply took her convictions and asked her about them, about the logical implications of them. And it was very powerful because she did the work, right? He wasn't trying to convince her she was wrong. He was saying, well, if you believe this, doesn't this follow? Or if you believe this, what about this? He was letting her convictions do the convincing. And the other thing that Kokel talks about in here, I think is really powerful, is sometimes, especially as Christians, we want to share the gospel because we want people to be saved, but not in every conversation can we share the gospel. And so what Kokel talks about in this book is basically how can we move the conversation, move the person one step closer to truth. And he uses this analogy of tilling the soil and then trusting that the Lord will bring someone else to plant the seeds, and the Lord will make it grow. And so if you are in a one-on-one conversation, that's what I would encourage you to do, is to think and to try and understand the other person's position. Now, of course, this is a challenge for both us parents and teenagers, because as parents, we often know what the right thing is, yet we need to be sensitive to our teenagers' thoughts and feelings. And teenagers, oftentimes, I know there's the emotion of, I am growing up. I need to go do this. I need to go try it for myself. And I'd encourage you to just take a moment and consider what your parents are saying. All right, let's jump to a second scenario. What happens if you are engaging in an individual but not in a conversation? Now, this may be a unique position. I am in this position as a columnist. From my job, I write an opinion column. I'm giving my opinion. In this podcast, I give my opinion. In this situation, when you are engaging with an individual but not in a conversation, I would encourage you to make sharp arguments, to have lots of evidence. Now, to also present the other side fairly, because it shows you understand the issue, and it shows a reader or a listener who disagrees with you that you have thought about it, that you aren't just coming at it from one side. But notice the difference in approach here. If you're talking to someone face to face, you're actually more interested in learning about what they believe and in questioning them. But if you're engaging with someone not directly, all you can do is you can present the best arguments you can for your side, because you don't know what they believe, right? When I'm writing my column, I can't go into someone's kitchen when they're reading the hard copy of the newspaper or they're reading it on their iPad and think, oh, well, they have this belief and this belief, so I can present this belief. No, I just have to make the best argument I can, present the evidence as best I can. If there's space, to present the other side the best I can. And the reason this is different is because the listener and the reader is not going to feel defensive in the same way when they consume it as an individual. Because if someone reads my column who disagrees with me normally, but is like, oh, I didn't think about it like that, or that's a good point, they aren't losing any face with me because I'm not there, right? Like, they don't have to defend themselves. They're not going to experience that same level of cognitive dissonance because they don't have to defend themselves with anyone. The term safe space is kind of overused, but that's what's happening here, right? Is that someone's engaging with arguments and they're in a space mentally where they can actually think, do I agree with that? Was I potentially wrong about that? And they don't have to save face because there's no one to save face with. And look, you're not going to convince everyone. My newspaper column has not convinced everyone, certainly not. But it can also equip others who believe the same as you do with good arguments. All right, then the third scenario is sometimes you are debating with someone, but the person you're trying to convince is actually in the audience. If you've ever gotten into a discussion on social media, which I generally encourage you not to do, because you have that kind of first scenario where you're engaging with someone as an individual. Well, guess what? They're not interested in like thinking about the argument. They're interested in making themselves look good to the audience. Okay. But if you engage in a debate on social media, if you're in a class with a teacher who disagrees with you, if you're ever in a formal debate, the people that you are trying to persuade are actually in the audience. And in this case, again, I encourage you to make sharp, controlled arguments. And Allie Beth Stuckey and Charlie Kirk were both excellent examples of this. They kept their emotions in check. They tried to engage with the speaker on a personal level. Because as much as in our grade 8, question 7, am I focused on the speaker or the argument? And that's a really important thing as you dig into and think about issues. But the audience in a debate is going to be thinking about what's the character and the demeanor of the person like. Uh, that may be even sometimes more important than when the argument the person actually has to make. So if you are in a formal debate, if you are debating for an audience in a class, again, I do not recommend social media debates by any stretch of the imaginations. But if you are in those situations, just remember, be respectful to the person who disagrees with you, but the people that you are trying to convince are actually in the audience. All right, so let's have a final pause point. I want you to think back to your last debate or argument. What would you have done differently? If you enjoyed this podcast, leave it a 5-star review right there in the podcast app. Scroll down, click 5 stars. Be courageous like Charlie, stay sharp, and give God the glory. I'll see you next time.